In this Clair Obscur Expedition 33 guide, we're going to be taking a look at Monoco and how to play him in combat in this game. Monoco is one of the more interesting characters because, unlike the other characters, he doesn't have a skill tree where you just put points and unlock skills. He actually acquires his skills from the enemies that you face in combat by collecting their feet. He has a little bit of a foot fetish for some reason. I don't know why. But you have to actually bring him with you in combat in order to acquire these skills. So if you don't bring Monoco with you throughout the game, unfortunately, you'll miss out on a lot of these abilities, and when you go to use them, he just won't be that effective. So keep in mind that if you intend to use Monoco at all throughout the game, you should bring him from the very beginning, or as much as you can, in order to acquire more and more skills, especially against some of the better enemies in the game, because those enemies typically have more powerful skills. So let's begin by taking a look at Monoco's combat mechanics, and the first thing we're going to take a look at is the Bestial Wheel on the right-hand side of the screen. Whenever Monoco has a turn, he'll always be somewhere on this Bestial Wheel, and his abilities will be boosted by where he is on that wheel. Certain abilities will be. So for instance, if he is on the Agile mask, then Agile abilities will typically have their damage boosted. If he is on the Balanced mask, then Balanced abilities will have their damage boosted. Some of these abilities will gain additional effects rather than have increased damage, but for the most part, when you're on a wheel, you're going to boost the damage of the corresponding abilities. So if you're on Caster, then Caster abilities will be boosted. If you're on Heavy, then Heavy abilities will be boosted. The exception here is the Almighty Mask, which will boost any ability that you use. So it doesn't matter which ability you use when you're in this mask, it's going to have the increased effect that you would normally have from using that ability on its said mask. So this means there are really two fundamental things about Monoco, which is one, you always want to try and use an ability that matches the mask if you're on, if possible. It's not always possible. This can be limited by the fact that you simply don't have an ability of that mask, or maybe the ability for that mask has too much AP cost and you don't have enough AP. It can be difficult to do this every turn, but ideally you'd be doing this every turn, or you want to try and be an Almighty Mask all the time in order to be able to use any ability that you want, which is even harder to do. So typically you're going to just be trying to match the ability that you're casting to the mask that you're in, but also striving to get into Almighty Mask when you can is also part of what you're going to be doing. So this brings us to the second part of Monoco's combat mechanics, and that's that each ability that you use from him will spin the Bestial Wheel a certain amount of places based on that skill. So you can actually predict where you'll be on the Bestial Wheel every turn by what ability you used the previous turn. And if you actually look at the skills, the tooltips in your menu in the top right-hand corner, you'll actually see like a number and the little turn icon there. It'll tell you how many positions it will move the wheel forward when you use that ability, so you know kind of what type of ability you're going to use next. Now, the thing that you don't know is where you'll begin on the Bestial Wheel every combat, because it's randomized. So you might start in Balanced, you might start in Almighty, which if you get lucky, that's great, and you can use any skill. You might start in Heavy. So this kind of rewards you for having abilities slotted on Monoco of each type, because you simply just don't know where you're going to start, and that can give you a skill to use that's empowered at the very beginning of combat. And if you look at the wheel, you'll notice that there are actually 9 places on it. You have 2 Agile, 2 Heavy, 2 Balanced, 2 Caster, and 1 Almighty. And why that's relevant is because if you were some reason in Agile and you cast an ability that only spends at 1, you could actually remain in Agile because you would just move to the next Agile location if you're on there. But you can't do that in Almighty Mask because you can only be on it once. There's no one forward, otherwise you have to spin the whole wheel around to get back in it. And also why that's relevant is it's harder to end up in Almighty Mask, because let's say an ability does 5 that you like, but you're 4 places to Almighty, you actually go past it and have to go all the way around again. But if there had been 2 places for Almighty, you would have landed on it. So it's harder to land on Almighty Mask, and it requires a bit of mathing with your skills to figure out a rotation. Thankfully, some of Monoco's weapons can make this a lot easier to do, and we'll get into that in a minute with his weapons, but let's talk a little bit about the skills next. One tip I can recommend as well is when you go to set up your skills on Monoco, set them in an order from amount of spins or amount of motions on the Bestial Wheel they do from smallest to largest. So like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That way you can find on the wheel how many you need to move the wheel to get to Almighty, and you can just look at your skills and figure out, you know, which one is the one that will get you there easily instead of having to read each skill each time. So as I mentioned earlier, Monoco acquires his abilities by defeating enemies while he's in your party, and then he will use those same abilities against enemies. He'll turn into them by using those abilities, and if you look over his skills, you can actually see which enemies he gets his abilities from by the icon that they came from. So you can kind of, when you're looking through your own abilities, kind of get an idea of what the attack will look like based on the enemy that it came from, because you have seen that attack before. Additionally, the different colors on the icons will tell you which mask boosts the damage of them. You'll notice there are lots of heavy, there are lots of agile, there are lots of balanced, and there are lots of caster ones, but there are very few almighty boosted abilities. I think there are only 3 total. So those are really, really deadly skills, but they are only boosted when you're on almighty, which is more difficult to do. But I highly recommend once you gain at least one of them that you slot one almighty ability, because they're usually the strongest abilities that Monoco can have, but they usually cost a lot of AP. And the next thing you'll notice when looking over Monoco's abilities is that he has many abilities that can break enemies. He has more skills that can break enemies than I think the rest of the party combined. I think each character has 1 or 2 skills that can break typically, and Monoco has like 6 or 8 skills that can break. He has a lot of skills that can break. So he's typically going to be the one in your party that does breaking on enemies, because he will almost always have an ability just from the number of break abilities that he has. At least one of them will almost always find a way into your build. And another thing you'll notice when looking through his abilities is that he can deal almost every single damage type in the game. He has such a wide range of damage types. He can do physical, he can do dark, he can do fire, he can do ice, he can do earth, he can do light damage. There are so many different damage types that he can do that he can almost find an ability that's effective against any enemy in the game, which is quite nice. The downside is that because he has such a wide range of abilities, sometimes when you go into a fight, some of those abilities won't be effective. And if you're trying to use empowered abilities by matching them to the mask, but it's a resisted damage type, you might have to go switch around your skills outside of combat to be better in a harder combat. And I'll just briefly mention some of the skills that I used with him that worked really well. The first one is called Moisinus Vandage. I don't know if I pronounced that correctly. I apologize if I didn't. Some of these have weird names. But this skill is a balanced ability. It does very high damage for 3 hits and can break enemies, and the damage is increased in balanced mask. It's also really nice. It doesn't cost too much AP at 5. It's in the mid-range of AP. And anytime you land on this empowered, it does tons and tons of damage from the beginning once you get him. So highly, highly recommend this ability if you can get it early on. For Caster Mask, I really like Ruler Bash. This is a 4 AP cost skill. The damage is not as high as the previous one. The cost is a little bit less. It can also break, which is nice. And again, the damage is increased when you're in Caster Mask. So this is a great way to get damage, to be able to break when you're in Caster Mask, and just keep cycling through your masks. Another ability that I really like for Heavy Mask is Stalact Punches. This deals ice damage, which isn't always effective against the enemy you're facing, so you'll have to keep that in mind, but it does really high break damage. If you boost Monoco's break damage, it will do even more, but you can fill like over half an enemy's break bar like against bosses with this ability, and you will fill just about any regular enemy's break bar when using this one time. So highly recommend this one if you want to get some enemy's break bar filled very, very quickly. Another really good one for Heavy Mask is the Glazed Earthquakes. This deals medium earth damage to all enemies in 3 hits and applies powerful to you, increasing your damage. If you use it in Heavy Mask, it will also apply it powerful to your allies. But if you start on Heavy or Almighty and lead with this ability, you can often wipe out all the enemies on the screen in one use of this ability. Like, it's such a great lead-off ability that sometimes it just ends the fight in one cast, which is really strong. And for Agile, I like a Best Wind. It's a very low AP cost skill. It deals very low damage. But what I really like about it is that Agile Mask abilities, in my opinion, are the weakest out of the types in general. And it's not always true, but it's mostly true, I find. And what's good about this is it allows you to play again after using it, which is very valuable because it'll spin your wheel a little bit for you. And when you use it in Agile Mask, it costs you 0 AP, so you have more AP for the next ability. And it basically allows you to just skip Agile Mask and go to a different mask and play a stronger ability because you can just play again immediately afterward and it doesn't cost you any AP, which is really, really nice. Okay, so let's take a look at some of Monoco's weapons. Just like the other videos, I'm not going to go through all of the weapons, but I'm going to go through a handful of them to just give you some examples how they affect Monoco's combat so you can kind of understand how to read these. So first of all, there are several weapons that allow you to start battle in a specific mask. Like Lucharo allows you to start in Agile Mask, and Grandaro allows you to start in Heavy Mask, and Joe Ario allows you to start battle in Almighty Mask. So there is a weapon that will allow you to start in each mask. This removes the randomized element of what mask you will start combat in and allows you to math out your rotation for your skills, because you can see how much the Bestial Wheel will spin on each ability, So you can actually set up a rotation that will get you into Almighty Mask in a certain amount of turns, or will keep you in masks that you like abilities for, because you can just math it out. Okay, it spins 6 times or moves 6 places, so then that puts me at this point on the wheel, and then when I use the next ability, I get to Almighty Mask, and then from Almighty Mask, I get to this mask, and you can sort of plan your entire skill rotation when using those weapons. So those weapons are really strong in that regard because they allow you to set up a rotation that will be the same every time. So let's take a look at Bolaro first. The first ability of this weapon reverses the Bestial Wheel order, so it will turn the opposite direction when it turns based on the ability that you use. This is kind of meh, in my opinion, because it doesn't really matter which direction the wheel turns. You're still going to be trying to do the same things, and since it's set up in a certain way, all that's going to do is just make you change your rotation of skills a little bit, and since you still start in a random place with this weapon, unlike some of the other weapons I just mentioned, you're going to have just various different abilities with different turn amounts in order to try and get to masks you want or Almighty Mask. The nice thing about this weapon, though, is that when you use an upgraded skill, or a skill that matches the mask that it boosts, is going to give AP to your allies and 2 AP if you land an Almighty Mask. So you can feed AP to your allies by using this weapon, which is the strongest thing about it. Next, we'll take a look at Fragaro. This makes it so that when you use free aim shot, it will spin the Bestial Wheel to a random value. So if you don't like the mask that you're in, or you want to try and get to a different mask because the ability you want to use to be boosted is better for the situation that you're in, you can burn a couple AP and try and fire off a couple free aim shots and get the Bestial Wheel where you want. You might succeed, you might fail, so it might waste your AP, but it's still nice to have the option to spin that wheel if you want. And additionally, this makes it so that free aim shots deal 100% more damage with Monoco, except when you're in Almighty Mask, so this is probably like 80% of the time. So his free aim shots are going to deal a lot more damage. And needless to say, if you're going to use this weapon, you would probably want to take things that boost free aim shot in terms of Pictos and Luminas, because you're going to be doing quite a bit of free aim shot with him, just because of how effective that damage is. Next, we'll take a look at Joyaro. And this weapon, you start battle in Almighty Mask. This is really, really strong, because any ability you use will be boosted when you do this, and there are, as I mentioned, a few abilities that need Almighty Mask, that if you can just lead with them at the beginning of combat, you can wipe out a group of enemies or deal a ton of damage to an enemy very, very quickly, which is really strong. And the more you don't take damage with this weapon, the more damage you do, so that's great. And your break damage is also doubled while in Almighty Mask. So if you're going to use, an ability that does high break damage like the one I mentioned earlier, it can be twice as good in this, to lead off combat with it, which is great. The next one we're going to take a look at is New Sorrow. This makes it so that when you parry, you increase the Bestial Wheel by 1, but taking damage resets the Bestial Wheel. Now, this is really interesting because, theoretically, if you use an ability and you're like a couple away from Almighty Mask, and you parry a couple times, you could end your turn, or you could end the enemy's turn in Almighty Mask, and your next turn could be there. But the downside is that if the guy's doing like a 3-hit combo and you only need to parry twice to get to Almighty Mask, then that third attack you have to dodge, or because if you get hit, it just resets the Bestial Wheel and you go back to wherever you began combat. So it's very, very tricky. You would have to have a good understanding of where you are in the Bestial Wheel when Monoco's turn is over, and know just how many times you'd have to parry and how many times you'd have to dodge in order to pull this off. So that can be very tricky, but in the right hands, you could end up in Almighty Mask a lot more often when using this weapon. And additionally, when you use a skill that matches its mask, it's going to deal 30% more damage, which is a crazy good buff to have. That means, every time you're matching the mask to an ability, you're going to do more damage, which is great. And you also gain +1 AP on mask change. Monoco has AP issues usually, so this is really good. Because he's always trying to match the skill to the mask, he can't really be picky about, which skills he's using so much, so if it costs high AP, he's still got to use it. So this can be a good way to keep fueling his AP so that he can keep using abilities. And the last weapon I'm going to take a look at is Sidaro. This makes it so that when you use an upgraded skill, you have 30% increased damage. So anytime you use an ability that matches the mask, you're going to have 30% increased damage that stacks every turn until you use an ability that doesn't match the mask, or your base attack, etc. So the key here is making sure you have abilities that you can use every time and that they are low enough AP you can use them every time. This isn't super beneficial in a lot of fights that are very quickly, that are not going to give you enough turns to really make use of this, but it can be very beneficial in longer fights. Additionally, base attack spins the Bestial Wheel to a random value. So let's say you begin combat, and you don't want the mask that you're in. You could base attack on turn 1, get to a better place, and then begin combat on the second turn where you want to be on the Bestial Wheel. You're obviously not going to use this base attack as much as you can because you're trying to use an upgraded skill every time. So this is really only valuable on turn 1. And also using an upgraded skill will give 1 AP to all allies, so you can funnel AP to them as you make your way through the rotation of upgraded skills, which is really good. When it comes to Pictos and Luminas from Monoco, I like picking things that revolve around break, that improve his break damage. Again, he's the one going to be doing the break most of the time, so he doesn't have to have Pictos or Luminas that boost break damage. But there are ones that benefit from break, like he gets AP when breaking an enemy, or he gets to another turn when breaking an enemy. All those sort of things are good for Monoco, and things that boost his AP as well, like Dead Energy and things like that, because he has to cycle through, kind of like Lune. His abilities are kind of predetermined by whatever ability he used last time, and whatever AP cost that skill is whatever AP cost it has. So if it's a high one, then he needs AP in order to be able to use it effectively. So having things that boost his AP as well is very valuable for him. Attribute-wise, just like other characters, you're going to try and match the stats that you select to the weapon that you find yourself gravitating towards, whether that's vitality, agility, luck, some combination of those, or whatever those stats are. You're always going to want to max out the 2 stats of whatever weapon you're using, and I typically recommend also putting a lot of points in vitality. Vitality just helps keep you alive, and there are a lot of abilities that are based off max health, like Monoco has abilities that heal based on max health. So the more health you have, the more healing you'll gain from those abilities. And also, there are Pictos and Luminas, like getting health from parrying or counterattacking, that are based on max health, so those are strong as well, and other characters have abilities that are also based on that. So vitality is always strong. Agility is always strong for speed, so you can go more often in combat and faster so that you can, control combat easier. And luck is good for critical chance, because a lot of things, your damage is boosted by critical hits, and there are a lot of Pictos and Luminas that also benefit from critical hits. So I always kind of recommend vitality, speed, and luck. So if you can find weapons that match 2 of those stats, that's great. If not, you'll probably max out whatever 2 stats and then put a little bit of points into those. So that wraps up my guide for Monoco. I hope you found this useful. As always, if you have other tips about Monoco, you can leave them in the comments. And if you have other questions about him, you can leave them there as well, and I will try and answer them as soon as I can.